Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to come and listen to me talk for an hour. I won't be talking exactly for an hour, probably like 35, 40 minutes, and I'll open up some questions if you have any. So for those who don't know me, my name is Jarvis Brookfield. I'm an artist. I focus on painting and drawing. And I studied BA here in Fine Art, started in 2017 and graduated in 2017. No, 2007, that'd be weird. Graduated in last year and then decided to do an MA in Fine Art, which I'm studying part-time in my second year at the minute. So the structure of the presentation is just going to take you on a little journey. I'd like to give you a bit of context and hopefully give you a better understanding of how I've gotten to the work that I'm creating today. So a little bit of my early life. This is me when I was around a little over a year old actually, and this is the to-be back garden of my childhood home. This is in Derby. Definitely can't remember this event happening, but I grew up in this house with my mother and my dad and my older brother. And I was saying a little bit before, my brother's been like a huge inspiration to me. He's an eccentric, someone who left the house at like 16, started working and bought himself an £800 computer. And to me, he's 6 years older than me, so like when I was 10 years old and he bought this £800 gaming computer, I was just like blown away. And he really introduced me to the weird and wonderful aspects of the world, like horror films at like 10 years old. He actually stole my mum's bank card and bought VHS tapes and rented them. And we watched things like Chucky, Scream, you know, all those kind of Candyman, all those weird, strange films. So I had a lot of nightmares actually throughout my teenage years, thanks to him. But my mum, she worked for a company called what used to be BMI, which is essentially British Midlands International with aeroplanes, and she was an accountant for them actually, but then got made redundant. And my dad has been working for a company called Battleby his whole life. You might have seen them at the side of the roads. They deal with like the infrastructure of cities, and you know, when you drive on the motorway, you see those big pylons. His company does that. Catalyst, my creative journey. And so we actually, when I was around, about 4 or 5, we went to live in Indonesia for 6 months. Because my dad's work involved going around to different parts of the country. He used to go to Canada, Africa, that's where he met my mum. And Indonesia, and the reason why I bring up Indonesia was such a pivotal point in my life. And interestingly, I didn't know that we was going to live there. Like, I found out 3 years ago that we were going to live there for the rest of our lives, but there was, at the time, there was like an uprising that took place. I think it was 1998 actually, not 97, that's wrong. And they basically wanted all the American and British people out of the country, so we had to essentially flee. And I was studying there at a school called British International. And I remember the day when, I don't know who they were, but they came on scooters and we had to like leave school, and I remember being sat in a little scooter and I feel like I was going to fall off. And, but it's such a rich experience seeing like a different culture at a young age. I don't know really what kind of impression that had on me, but I think being exposed to that was very refreshing, and it made, at the time I remember feeling very alive, just being in this completely different environment. But the main reason I bring up Indonesia is because of Crash Bandicoot, of all things, Indonesian, obviously. I took my PlayStation with me, and I remember playing this game obsessively every day. I don't know why, I just loved how Crash Bandicoot looked. But one evening, when we were in the apartment that was our home, I was playing Crash Bandicoot, and for some reason I paused the game, and I wanted to draw. I just loved his black nose and his like triangle face, and I tried to draw it. I remember tracing it, Oh, so it's terrible. It's so bad. So took it off, did it again, tried to trace it. I couldn't quite get it to look right. It was just so frustrating. I remember it being a moment where I was just really frustrated, engaged in this kind of act of trying to make something look how I wanted it to look. But I couldn't do it, so I asked my dad, and you know, this is one of those moments. It's like if my dad was in a bad mood, like who knows how this could have gone really. He could have been like, no, like, but he was just so gracious and was like, yeah, I'll draw it for you, and he drew it. I went off to play Crash Bandicoot, came back, he's look, it's done, came back again, and then did that a few more times, and then he'd finished it, and I remember that feeling which I had was just, I can't put it into words, but it felt electric. Like, I remember just, like, he had done something which I couldn't do, and it showed me that it's like possible to do this thing. And I remember just snatching the drawing out of his hand and like, and go to like trace this drawing, and I couldn't get it right, but it just set me off on a you know, this desire to want to draw more. Actually, I think I'd always been drawing, and my dad actually has a watercolor piece that I did when I was like 3, that I don't remember making, and yeah, but I don't have those pictures unfortunately, but an obsession. So from that event, Crash Bandicoot, you know, my interests ranged from Spider-Man. It's just like when that film first came out, I just became absolutely obsessed. I used to spend several hours every day in the back garden. Has anybody seen that film? So there's a scene where he finally realizes he can climb the wall, and it was just like this moment of like, I want to do that. So I just remember going into my back garden and trying to climb the wall and praying to God actually that I could climb this wall. It never happened. I don't think I'd be here if it. Harry Potter was another huge influence to me, and all of these things, I drew them constantly. Interesting story about Harry Potter is the year that film came out, we went to a New Year's party, and I could have just drawn it on, but I decided to scratch the little zigzag, the little like Harry Potter. I scratched it in with a safety pin.
Oh my gosh.
And just like, and then went, and then I felt like that. I was now legit. I was literally Harry Potter. And then Dali is like the kind of, you know, the sore thumb in all of this, because going back to my brother, my brother bought this book back when he was about 17. So he's 6 years older than me, so I was about 11 at the time. And I remember just like, I didn't really read any of the text in the book, or I just remember obsessing over the pictures, and I didn't quite understand them, but I wanted to keep on going back to this book. Just kept on wanting to go back and look at it, and it kind of went away. He still has this exact same book actually. And then Dragon Ball Z was just the craziest stuff to watch when you're like 10 years old, just screaming at other kids in the playground. I wanted to come in my arm. Trying to punch like really fast. And then much later on oh yes, there's a random like woman there in a bikini. But these magazines, I used to get £5 pocket money every week from like polishing the house and stuff. And I used to go and buy these magazines, not for the women, but maybe, I don't know. But for the cars, I loved how people, especially this culture in the UK of how people would create, you know, they felt like works of art. They would transform like a standard car into this beautiful thing that today when I see they look very tacky actually. They sound disgusting because they always drive past my flat. But I used to love drawing these, and again this kind of like this pivotal moment. So I had the obsession with and the frustration of trying to draw Crash Bandicoot. And I remember getting a Banzai magazine, which is the top right, and there was this yellow Mitsubishi Evo, which is the same colour as that one there, and I remember drawing that and having the same feeling of that obsession of wanting to get it right and feeling like I couldn't get it right, and I had to go for lunch at the same time, but I was like, you know, like there's just that anxiousness of like wanting to finish it, wanting to get it right. And then for my 16th birthday, my brother bought me a graffiti board book. And I never actually, I still to this day haven't used a spray can to create like a piece. I don't know why, I'll get around to it at some point, I'm sure, but at the time I just stuck to drawing them in my sketchbook, and I would colour them with felt tip pens, because I was just afraid of the idea of like using colour, like in that sense. It just felt so, I don't know, I was just terrified, so I just stayed away from it. And it was actually a friend who introduced me to it, who used to, my bedtime, whenever I went out, I had to be in at like 8 o'clock, but he didn't have a bedtime, so he'd be out until like midnight, and would go tagging, and then on the weekend he would show us where he'd tagged and stuff. Like, 8 o'clock curfew at 16 is not nice. So yeah, it's kind of transitioning from that period. I was actually going through a lot of, like throughout school, I didn't really know who I was, never really fitted in, too brown for the white kids, too white for the brown kids, so kind of always feeling a little bit lost, and got into a lot of trouble, got really addicted to cannabis and caffeine, used to drink energy drinks relentlessly, that's pun intended because one's called relentless. And yeah, it was just like it was probably the darkest time in my life, but also the most important part of my life so far, I think, in kind of bringing me to where I am today. And I don't feel like everybody has to go through this, but it definitely, kind of glad it came out the other side relatively normal. And that's why I put Hero's Journey. So I actually, in 2012, I started producing music on computers, and I spent 4 years doing that, and I got very obsessed with it, but ultimately had like a relationship with it where I just was interested in external validation and trying to make lots of money and be famous, and I was very alone as well, and I wasn't sleeping, and again I was addicted to cannabis, I was smoking. I'm not saying cannabis is bad, but me personally it just isn't good for me, and just staying up until late hours in the morning, not finishing my assignments. So this path ultimately came to an end, but in a kind of a positive way. It doesn't mean that I still love music, and I still love the piano, and I actually really want to like have a go on Logic again, which is like a music production software to make some music. But music's really important to me, actually. I'll talk a bit more about it in a bit. So kind of from this phase of just feeling very lost, alone, depressed, things just weren't going very well. I had a loving family around me, but just this kind of this weight, this pain that I carried. Somehow during my 4-year journey at Confetti, I discovered Terence Mckenna. And I don't know how exactly I discovered him. I remember that when I did consciously look to find out about him, his name had been like rattling in my mind, and he introduced me to the world of psychedelics. And it was something that I went on my 18th birthday. I went to Amsterdam, experienced it there, and I just remember having this very strange experience, just walking around Amsterdam streets, which I don't recommend. Just feeling very confused. People being here 1 minute, turning, looking back, and they're gone. And I was 18 years old, so I was like still very immature, and it was so weird. But I remember that evening, falling asleep and just being exposed to this kaleidoscopic kind of Ferris wheel, and that just stuck with me. But it never really, I still went off from that and had very just like straight back to living the kind of life that I was living before. But then in 2015, after like a series of events, I met my girlfriend in 2012, transitioned 2013, and that kind of, one of these moments that kind of corrects the course. It's like she came into my life as like a really positive influence. It kind of helped me realize that I need to do some exercise. I need to get off my arse and stop. She didn't tell me consciously, but her example was really infectious. It was just a really healthy, because I wasn't hanging around with good people before. Not they weren't good people, but people who had habits that weren't necessarily beneficial to your well-being, my well-being anyway. And then again, from the encouraging words of Terence Mckenna through the internet, I had a profound experience in 2015 that just kind of all of that feeling of loneliness, all that feeling of like I've got no purpose, just depression, all of that weight just kind of completely melted away. But I had been like asking God for a sign, like I used to pray and constantly say, like, you put me here, so you need to tell me what I'm here to do. Like, this is why I'm here, like, you need to tell me what I'm here to do. And, but in that experience, it was very profound, and lots of revelations, and as a result of that, like, well, towards the end, there was a small voice that whispered to me, stop the drawing. And I ignored it for like 6 months actually, because it was so quiet, it was so like, but it kind of like just stayed there in the back of my head, because when I was making music, I'd stopped for 5 years of drawing. I didn't draw at all. Like, I stopped drawing, I didn't look at art, I didn't do anything, I didn't have anything to do with it at all. But when I did start, these are the first drawings that I created. You can barely see them. That was one of the first ones actually, 2015. And it was just this, there wasn't any intention of what I wanted to create. There was just this feeling of starting with circles, and interesting shapes, just building it up. And what's funny is when I started to try and draw again, my girlfriend would laugh at this, as like, I used to try and draw for like a little bit of time, and then I'd just get tired. And like, it's really weird, like I just fall asleep like after I try and draw for a bit. But I turned that one in the end, on the end into like a little canvas. But the piece in the middle was created a little bit different to the ones on either side. I started this practice where, as a result of that experience that I had, I really got into meditation. And I remember I started this practice of like automatic drawing, where I would put incense, like burn a little bit of incense, play some music, and then just stare at a blank page and wait for. Da Vinci actually recommends this, like, if you look at like a crooked wall or a textured wall or something, shapes will start to emerge, like anybody can experience that, and that's really what I was trying to do with paper, where I just like look at it and then something would emerge, and then just draw a line and capture it, and then eventually go over it with ink. It felt like a very spiritual thing for me to do. It felt like I was communing with, that kind of the energy and the emotions and the feeling that I'd been left with, that helped kind of resolve that darker period of my life. So yeah, 2017, so as some people know, I'm obsessed with this guy. I think he's one of the greatest living artists on the planet at the minute. In 2017, I discovered his work on Instagram, and I've told him, I've actually spoken to him a few times, and I told him how when I first saw his work, I just hated it. Like, it's really beautiful, like, obviously I learned that later, but I really thought it was like, because I was creating like these serious black pen and ink drawings. I was trying to be serious and dark, despite having had like quite a light experience. But when I saw all this colour, it just didn't make sense to me, but I just kept on coming back to it again and again and again. Like, but then kind of looking at Instagram, flicking through, like, oh, what's this? No, just go and draw my serious stuff again, coming back again. It's a constant rejection of, and he had actually said, like, he's experienced constant rejection, so I think this is part of his journey. But after another experience that I had with entheogens, another voice whispered to me again, start with colour. And I'll show you some of those early paintings, but when I came back to looking at James Jean's work, I was completely blown away by the layers that were beneath what he's creating. It wasn't just about the surface. I wanted to know, like, how do you make, it was so enchanting and obsessing and and just like as his followers show, people are obsessed, like they're infatuated with his work because it just has this magical, unlimited, multi-dimensional like feeling to it. So yeah, start with the colour. So these are actually the first, after that voice, like probably like a week later, the first paintings that I started making. Yeah, very rudimentary, but you know, it was something that I needed to do, and actually at the time I didn't really care about how it looked. I just knew that I needed to paint. There's a bit of a James Dean influence, so I tried to make a piece of birds like me and mushroom. Then also learning how to paint form with acrylic paints. I got some really crappy acrylic paints from Wilco that when I actually smelled them like 3 years ago actually, after having used them, they just smell like really, really bad. I didn't realise how bad they smell. But yeah, there was just this trying to paint really, to get familiar with it. And I'd never in my life painted. So this was 2017. I'd never painted like this before. It was, like I said, it was terrifying to me to do, but it had now become like a necessity. And then as time went on, and I started learning about the kind of underlying principles of how James Dean got better at his paintings, of wanting to understand observational drawing, observational painting, working from life, all these kind of skills started to, it became just a really big obsession of mine. And I still have this plant at home. I don't know the name of it, but I remember painting this from life, all with acrylic paint. And then this was actually one of the first pieces that I created when I started my BA here, so 2017. I don't remember the names of any of these, but they were very fun to create actually, and I still have them. So yeah, 2017, started my BA here. I think I mentioned before how my girlfriend like encouraged me to start, and I kind of resented uni for a long time. I don't know why. I just thought like, oh, uni's for weirdos. And, yeah, fair enough. But it's turned out to be one of the most important parts of my creative development. When I think back on it now, I had a lot of difficulty in the first year because when I came here, I wanted to learn how to paint. We wasn't exactly showing that, we were showing other things, and it was quite frustrating. But when I look back at it now, it's been very important to me. But one of the most important parts of that first year was the art history lectures by Karina. And the reason why I put my name there is because she delivered them, and probably still does deliver them in such an enthusiastic way that I think is so helpful when you're learning something that you don't know much about but you're interested in. It's like, I'm really happy that Karina delivered those lectures because it made me feel excited. Like it fulfilled that need for me to want to learn and like be exposed to art really. Because I didn't really know about art. Like I knew about Dali and I'd heard about Da Vinci, but I never really knew about like everything that's kind of encompassed with art, within art history. But throughout those lectures, we were exposed to so much, and a few of those were Paul Rubens and the Baroque. I mean, seeing these paintings in life is like, they're just painted so beautifully. But when I first saw them, what appealed to me the most about Rubens' work, which is the top right piece, if you don't know, is just the sense of energy and movement and vitality and the kind of beastliness of and you know, the voluptuousness of figures. It just has this sense of aliveness that I feel, it's exaggerated, but it's alive and vibrant. And again, running off that theme of vibrancy, the pre-Raphaelites, you know, when their paintings were first kind of revealed to the public, people hated them. People thought they were just like terrible because the colours were too bright and they completely changed this tradition of brown school painting that was present in England, where people painted on brown, imprimatur, and things were all dark and moody. But these guys came with this breath of fresh air and kind of reimagined religious stories. Like, there's a picture which I didn't put on here, but it's of Jesus in young Jesus in the carpenter's workshop, and people hated it. But these paintings for me are just some of the most beautifully created pieces of the 20th century. They're just so bright. And there's actually one at the New Walk Museum. It's a watercolour. You can't get close enough unless you go under the barrier. Don't recommend it. But because you want to see it, you want to see all those details, right? But these artists, these are different artists. That's like William Holman Hunt, and then the top one's called Ophelia by John Millay, and the one on the left is by William Holman Hunt, the same guy who painted this. But that theme of vibrancy and energy that I learned from these artists is something that to this day, is really important in the creation of my own work. Obsession again. So yeah, I kind of mentioned, like, when I started uni, I wanted to learn how to paint, and I wasn't being taught it. It's like, it kind of sent me into a resentful state, but also an angry, but I had this like energy to I still wanted to learn. I didn't get too bitter about it. And a bit all over the place there, so how to get better at painting. So again, going back to James Jean, when I first saw his work, I knew that there was something more to it. I knew that if I wanted to learn how to create paintings like this, I couldn't copy them. I knew that, I don't know what it was, but I knew there was layers to it. And from some of his interviews, I found these things like life painting, which I mentioned, and life drawing. In 2016, I started life drawing. So it's on the far left, it's just like different places. My girlfriend looking at Game of Thrones theories. Which obviously just watched that and trying to figure out form with colour. Using acrylic paints, this might have been pastels. And then just drawing people from life, which for me to this day is something that I find to be one of the most beautiful ways of bringing yourself into the present moment. Even if you're not interested in making art, I feel like life drawing is, it just slows you down, and you can really take in a person, and you kind of see their mannerisms, and it's really beautiful actually, because you kind of get past your own preconceived ideas of who this person is. Like, after spending like half an hour drawing, without them knowing. As soon as they know that I'm drawing, I always stop. I always turn away. But yeah, while I was on this treasure hunt of wanting to get better at painting, we have some water. Yeah, with this like treasure hunt of wanting to get better at painting and listening to variety of artists, not just James Jean, but looking at the old masters and kind of trying to find the principles that underlie how to create a picture. Because I kind of knew what I wanted to create. I knew that I wanted to create imaginative paintings. I just didn't know what, and I didn't know how. But some of the key figures of helping me to develop those core skills, James McKenna, who is an illustrator based in New York. And what I learned from him was about seeing, when you're drawing a person, to see them three-dimensionally, as opposed to, just remember that when you're drawing a person, there's a back of them, there's a back to, and there's energy in the way people stand. It's not static. And then there's Glenn Villepue, who again, I think really resonated with me because of my love for Rubens and that voluptuousness of how figures are painted and drawn. Vincent Desiderio, and if you're interested in painting or just even in art in general, so he has some lectures online that are very specific. He has his own specific ideas, but then also ways of approaching picture making that is a lot different to how a lot of painters paint. And Stephen Assail and James McKenna actually taught James Jean That's how I found out about those two. But the other two I found out about online. I actually visited their area through James G. But again, Stephen Sale makes these paintings which just feel, you can feel the presence of a human being through a flat surface, which I find to be so attractive that when an artist can do that, it's not just about making them look right, making them feel right, it's actually animating the presence of a human being. There's an empathic, in all of these people there's an empathic sensibility. It's not about creating for the sake of like to display the technique. So look how good my painting is. It's like actually like this is something that's beautiful, and that's what James McMullen's really good at communicating, is that when you're drawing, it's not about displaying your skills or drawing what you think should be seen, but it's like really looking at the person, imagining the person, and then looking from that place as opposed to from the inside out, it's from like the outside in and then out. So this was 2018. I mean, so these guys that I learned from, this happened over the course of like, so I started Bandicoot in 2017, and then I studied relentlessly for like a year and a half, probably 2 years, just like obsessing, reading as much as possible, writing as much as possible, watching as much as possible. But in around about early 2018, I created this piece. And as opposed to the other paintings that I'd created with like shitty Wilco paints, which is a great start. No, I'm not knocking them, but it was just like, I got like a little sample kit of gold and acrylic paints online, and when I laid them down on the canvas, it was like, oh, it's too bright. The colours I didn't know what to do. The colours were so luminous and just like enjoyable to look at. But I created this piece, and this piece sold like straight away pretty much to my friend's brother. Hasn't been the case with all my paintings. I made several more after this, and kind of in a similar way, but yeah. Then going into my second year, I created a body of work. There was another piece in relation to this. I just had this kind of all this pent-up anger that I kind of transformed into enthusiasm, and just really wanted to. I burned myself out in the process of making these, but I just had this desire to really want to get these ideas out. You can kind of see the James Jean influence, you know, with the flowers and the emphasis on figures. But I created these in like the first term, so they're all different sizes, and I don't actually remember the names of the ones on the side, but the centre's called Carrier. I kind of saw it as this, you know, the fact that we all carry this kind of burden, but not showing this in a negative sense, that like, burden is probably not the right word, but we all carry a story within our consciousness that affects our lives in different ways, and is something that will stay with us our whole life. We all have like our shortcomings, we all have our mistakes, and our regrets, and but also, you know, the beautiful memories as well. So they were all very personal pieces, and kind of making a little bit of sense out of some of the revelations that I have from my psychedelic experiences. Yeah, I painted over the other two. I didn't really like them, actually. That's become something which I like. If I don't like a piece, it's like it just needs to be painted over. Like I can't just keep staring at it. So again, continuing with life drawing from 2018, and you know, really having absorbed the teachings from James McMullen, especially, the drawings started to feel a bit more alive, and this is carried on into my imaginative work, because I feel like in whatever you're creating, it's good to fill the wellspring, is to nourish your sense of creativity. And, for me, drawing, obviously with drawing and painting being the basis of what I do, drawing from life really feeds the imagination. It allows you to manipulate forms and shapes as you need. But yeah, yeah, like I said before, it's a really beautiful thing to do. I haven't done it in a while actually. My feet up there. So 2019, moving from those pieces which you saw. So this was made around about, I think this was made during the summer actually, 2019. Matador on the far left, and these two pieces were called In Spirit of the Masquerade. You've got the brother and the sister. These pieces sold, which is really nice to get them out of the house. Selling for me isn't really about making money, it's just about making space in the house to create more work. So it's really a kind of logistic, I just need space. But this in particular, Matador was a pivotal piece for me. It felt like I'd made some progress again. It felt like I'd like learned something new, and there was a lot of paintings created throughout. But I loved the way I'd create a sense of energy, and I'd drawn it directly onto the canvas. But with these, I painted them. My process has changed a little bit over time. So with that piece, with Matador, I started off with like a drawing directly on the canvas, built it up in layers, and then with these two, I just painted like a single flat green colour, and then just washed some colour over it, and started trying to like figure out forms, shapes. I guess at uni they always talk about like context, or it's like context behind the work. It's really difficult. I had an interest definitely in masquerades. I mentioned a term before called the hero's journey, which I learned from someone called Joseph Campbell. And I just became obsessed with the idea of the process of a masquerade, of how, I think there's a French ethnographer called Arnaud van Gennep who identified the structure of a masquerade, of that ritual event, of how it goes from the kind of departure from society, and then you're kind of thrown into ambiguity, which is called the liminal phase, and then there's a return. And it felt very similar to the psychedelic experience in that there is a departure from everything you know. There is a sense of ambiguity, but then there's a return. And having looked at masquerades and watched videos of African masquerades, I just love the energy and the vitality of them. And I wanted to create some paintings that celebrate that. And I think the way in which I created them kind of spoke to that. It was very difficult. It was stressful because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to find. I didn't know how to make sense of the chaos. So it also became like the process became a narrative of itself that was really enjoyable actually to make, but I don't have them anymore, so I just have to look at these JPEGs. Again, you might recognise Andy and Alex and Pachute there at uni. But just life drawing again, I just show these because of how, well, I think they're really good. Like, I really like them. It's one of the reasons why I'm probably just showing off. But essentially showing how important they are to me as well. It's like always looking at the world around you, like never being passive to people. Or, and I am guilty of being passive to people. This isn't making any by any means super empathic, but yeah. So discovering Ernst Fuchs, who's an Austrian painter. I don't know if I showed his work before, but these are some of his pieces. The two on the right are created with graphite on canvas, and he creates these worlds of rich with a sense of mythology and timelessness, attention to detail, which resonates with my own sensibilities of wanting to. I wouldn't say that I'm a perfectionist, but I like, because I know when to stop. I don't think perfectionists know when to stop, but I like things to feel right, and I feel like Ernst Fuchs is just a masterful creator in that respect. And how his work influenced me is because I wanted to create a sense of luminosity in my work. I wanted to create a sense of light and vibrancy, and that's something which Ernst Fuchs was able to create through something called the Misch technique, which is predominantly in oils, and I paint in acrylics. But I found that the oil painting techniques can translate to acrylics fairly well, actually. So the piece in the bottom left is actually a corner of a chapel that he's painted called St. Egid's Chapel. If you go onto Google, if you're interested, if you just type in St. Egid's Chapel 3D, there's like a 3D scan of the whole room that he created with several apprentices in the course of 5 or 6 years. And then that's just like a close at the top of the show. So, taking on what I've learned from Ernst Fuchs about the Misch technique, creating a sense of vibrancy. The pieces on the far ends, they were created before I discovered Ernst Fuchs. Actually, the way I discovered him was a bit like how I discovered James Jean. I'd seen his name at the bottom of a Wikipedia page of visionary art, and I just used to brush it off because I thought it was, who's the other Ernst? There's another Ernst. His last name's Ernst. Max Ernst. I thought it was Max Ernst, so I wasn't reading properly, and I was just being ignorant. And then I just I clicked onto it, and I was just taken away. But so yeah, there's a bit of a crossover here. But these two pieces on the far left, what happened actually to bring me to create this piece in the middle was that I started getting interested in the backgrounds more. So I created a piece on the far left called Peel. And we went to New York in the 3rd year, and it just completely changed how I saw art. I realised that there was no rules. You could do whatever the hell you wanted. There's no rules. You could just create whatever you like. And I came back with that kind of energy and just started creating these even weirder. I wasn't bothered about, there's a head hanging off this guy, but some of the parts are still anatomically correct. But I wanted to just let loose. And from looking at masquerades, I've gotten into masks. Looking at Japanese masks, there's something called no masks, which are created beautifully in Japan, Far East Asia. It's great. Spent time drawing that and incorporating it into my paintings. But then towards the end of 2020, having learned this Misch technique and wanted to create vibrancy, I created this piece called Viorba. No, this is Lumelia actually, and it was one of those moments where I was just wow, it's just another level in my development. It felt like I'd done something which I'd never done before, and it kind of spoke to. I think what I really wanted to do was recapture the energy that I'd experienced in those entheogenic experiences. Rather than the figure, I kind of got a bit tired with drawing the figure. I feel like a lot of work's been done around that. I didn't feel like I could add anything to that area of the art world. I just wanted to really dive into just creating imaginative, surreal, strange worlds. And then later in the year I created a few. So like I said in my process, I start off with a relatively small graphite drawing, which I then transfer onto a larger surface. And these pieces are just created in graphite. And that's how they transform into paintings. So on the far left you've got Canova. In the middle you've got Omnitru. In the far right you've got Inaquian. And what happened is before I was titling paintings with words that are recognisable, but I wanted to create titles to words that were made up to kind of fit the alien nature of the painting. So Inaquian means inner acquaintance, Omnitru, I don't know, Canova, I forget because I write so much about each one, but Canova, it means jeweled delights from beyond the veil, and that was actually created most recently. That was created at the start of the year, and then Omnitru somewhere between the two. And again, just pushing all those learnings about energy, volume, dimensionality, vibrancy, colour, light, just pushing that to its limit really, and trying to create paintings that people can get lost in, that are almost like a to hallucination themselves, but to let your imagination run free. I really enjoyed creating these paintings. This piece was the most difficult piece for me to create in Aquin. I don't know why. Emotionally, it took a lot out of me for some reason, and I guess I was just kind of pushing past my sphere of comfort. With every kind of development, your sphere kind of opens up a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And with Aquin, I feel like it was just pushing me a little bit more. And the same with the piece in the middle, Omnitru, it just pushed me a little bit more in my comfort zone. Because the timings, like I thought, I had all these ideas that it might take like 2 weeks to create, it ended up taking like a month. And not knowing how to manage all the chaos again. But ultimately creating something that I particularly enjoy, and having had a show with these works on display, like a lot of people really, especially the piece in the middle, seem to be drawn to that one. So I had my first solo exhibition at LCD Depot in September, which was fantastic. I mean, I just loved listening to what people had to say about the work. I think that's so important for me as an artist. I have my own ideas about what the work is about, I write descriptions about the work, but one thing that was the kind of highlight of the show was just listening to how people would say, oh, it reminds me of this, it reminds me of that, or it makes me feel this way. And people were even coming quietly and saying, yeah, I have a psychedelic experience, but not being afraid to talk about it, and just having sincere conversations with people was really nourishing for me, because I'm out speaking now, but I'm pretty much a hermit. I like to stay inside. I like my own company, so I just like to paint. But I really appreciated having a solo exhibition, which how it came about is that at the beginning of this year, I had about 4 or 5 paintings ready, and I remember around about March, bringing LCD Depot and spoke to Chris, who had already been following my work and wanted to work with me in some capacity, but didn't know how. And obviously I proposed the show, and then there was a lot of back and forth of figuring out when we could do the show, and it was going to be in August, and it got pushed forward, back, forth, but we eventually settled on September 17th. So there's a few snaps from the event itself. So the title of the show, as you saw, was Aquin, which is the title of the pieces which I just showed before. Essentially means inner acquaintance, which is all about becoming acquainted with the inner world of what it means to be human. And there was 14 paintings in total, and 12 drawings. But it was a really wonderful experience actually. It was stressful, but you always, whenever I look back on things that are stressful, they always turn out to be like the highlights. Always turn out to be like the highlights of what happened, those difficult moments. And then more recently, this was surreal and overwhelming, especially at the event. But I was out of like 1,000 people. Us 10 were shortlisted and were able to exhibit our works in Saatchi, a very prestigious gallery in London, and international. This was I've never been to that space before, but it was so beautiful to see so many different types of works, and in particular, I grew very fond of Anne's work, the lady who won. Like when I first saw them online, it was just the dimensionality of them, and how she used all these different fabrics is beautiful. Yeah, this experience was like, people have been saying like I'm a superstar, but I'm obviously not. Like it's so weird, like something, oh you're like a superstar, what's it like? I'm not famous at all. Like, but yeah, got to meet some interesting people. I got to spend the evening with, like I didn't go to sleep until like 2 o'clock that night, and but we went for like an itsu after, and I got to have a deep conversation with Sam, guy in the centre, get to know a little bit about him and his story. And I really appreciate that about things like this, is you get to hear people's stories. And I feel like as I'm getting older now, I feel like stories are everything. Like listening to people's stories and getting to the bottom of like who people are has just become really a lot more interesting to me. Oh, I haven't got any more pictures. If you have any questions about that, I can answer them shortly. So this is more recently. So after finishing that body of work, which was exhibited in the solo exhibition and at the Robert Walters UK New Artist of the Year prize, I hadn't created work in a while. Like when my solo show was on, I hadn't painted, but I was drawing and I was studying sacred architecture, and really wanted to know about, really wanted to understand the ornamentation of sacred spaces. So I spent a lot of time throughout the show just studying them, just drawing them, not really creating anything that would hope to turn into paintings. But these are 3 new works that are currently in progress of being painted. They don't have titles yet, but just become interested in this idea of symmetry. I feel like Ernst Fuchs' work has definitely rubbed off on me. So yeah, I can't really say much about them. I don't really have any context for them as to what they mean, but so lessons learned so far out of this journey, and obviously there's always more to be learned. It's like, do I feel drawn towards what speaks to me? I think there's so much going on in the world that we're exposed to now, and like many times I've felt very swayed that I should be doing this, or maybe I should do this, or hearing the opinions of other people and then maybe like completely rethinking what I should do. But actually, what always happens is that takes me to like a little dark patch where I doubt myself. But then ultimately I realise that it's best for me to do what I feel drawn to create, because ultimately that's ultimately what matters. And when you're doing something that you're enthusiastic about, I feel that is healing to yourself and to others. Keep yourself serviced. So this isn't like a prescriptive thing at all. This is just something that I've learned over the years. It's like, so obviously when I met my girlfriend, I wasn't really exercising, taking care of my body or anything like that, but I found that exercising, eating right is like all conducive to creating art. Art isn't just like a kind of isolated thing that you just do. It is a part of your life. So I feel that how we look after our vehicle, which carries us through life, it needs to be well oiled, not oily, but like, but like, you know what I mean? It has to be limber and strong, like good sleep. Like if I don't get enough sleep, I'm just not a very nice person. If I don't eat, I get very irritable. Too much caffeine just makes me really irritable. So yeah, I've just realised that that's important to me. Filling the wellspring kind of goes back to what I was saying about life drawing, about constantly imbibing, imagery, whatever it is that you are interested in, just constantly soaking that in, and making, like, say if you watch a film, like make a little drawing or a sculpture, or if you work with fabric, like whatever technique you might use, just to create something about that. Because ultimately, for me anyway, to create from imagination, I need to have a wellspring. My internal, I have the kind of desire to create, and I have the by taking things from the world, I give my imagination food to create, hopefully limitless. All ideas already exist. This is one of a revelation that I got a while back, that I don't believe that in artist block. I just don't believe in that. I think it's a bit of a myth. I feel that all ideas already exist. They're already there for us for the taking. And actually, I kind of take the Greek idea of ideas, which I got from. Anyone heard of Elizabeth Gilbert? She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She did a TED talk where she spoke about how the Greeks saw. Like, also, I don't believe in the idea that someone's a genius. Like, I think that the Greeks saw it that we have a genius, so that if somebody did a crap job, they would just say, "Oh, it's their genius's fault. It's not them." So the pressure was taken off the individual, but going back to the all ideas already exist, I feel that by showing up every day, filling the wellspring, and constantly looking at things you're interested in, is that you become like a beacon, and then ideas come to you. Like, they see that you're there and ready, so they just come to you. And I feel like kind of levels the playing field, rather than seeing people as like geniuses or whatever. Like, I don't like Kanye West called himself a genius. I love Kanye West, but I don't think he's a genius. I think he has a genius. Discipline and established structure, that's really important to me. I feel like as creative people, or just most people in general, are just kind of scattered. And then especially as creative, you want to do this, you want to do this, you want to create this thing, you want to look at this thing. Sometimes even now I have like 20 tabs open, different things that I'm looking at. But I found that discipline and like structure, in the sense of like working for this amount of time, having lunch, just helps me be the most creative, and actually just prevents all of that unnecessary pain and suffering that comes from like overworking yourself into early hours in the morning. Not eating right, not exercising. Like, it just gets in the way of creating the best work that you could create. And then to top it off is to never give up. I mean, it's as everybody knows, not even in creativity, life is difficult. Life is very challenging. It's like there's so many different options now of what you think you should do. You should do this, like this person has this, like I don't have this. It's all this, and when you've got your one thing, it's like, I feel it's so important just to cultivate it. It's like a field that you have to continuously nurture and find different ways of keeping it vital. Never. I think when you give up, that's kind of it. It's like, if you give up and it's just like, I'm never doing it again, and that's kind of it. You kind of shut the door on the muse. The muse is like, okay, cool, I'll find someone else. Any questions?